So we're on to mixed exercise 22, question 6. And again, we're on statistical hypothesis testing, and we're looking at ownership of homes. And we're told that in the UK, 64% of homes are owned, and someone wants to find out whether this proportion is different in Germany. She surveys a random sample of 180 families in Germany and finds that 98% of them own their homes. Conduct a hypothesis test at the 5% significance level to test whether the proportion of families in Germany who own their homes is different from that in the UK. So if we're going to do a statistical hypothesis test, we ought to have some null and alternative hypotheses. So let's do that. Let's say that the null hypothesis is that ownership of houses in Germany is the same as the UK, which we are told is apparently 64%. And the alternative hypothesis, well, let's read it carefully. Are we asking for, is it going up or down or a change? We're asked in this case whether it's different from, so simply whether it's different, not if it's more or less. And that's going to matter in a second when we talk about significance levels. Is not equal to 64%. And I'd say that's, so in fact, let's talk about it now. Because it's a change, we're saying it's a two-tailed test. So because we don't know if it's going up or down, two-tailed test at 5% significance level. Which means we're going to have 2.5% at the top end and 2.5% at the bottom end. And we'll deal with that in just a moment. Let's make an assumption. Let's assume that ownership follows the binomial distribution with some n and some p. And we're told then that this person has done a sample of 180 families and found 98 owned houses. Let's see if that meets, what happens when you put that into our formulae for binomial distributions. Well, I think a good first thing to do actually is to say what is 64% of that 180. If it was bang on 64, let me go back. If it was bang on 64, so 0.64 times that 180 is 115.2. So when I look at my distribution, which is going to look something like that, my middle value I might expect it to be is, what did I say, 115.2. And there's some value down here below which I get 2.5% of the total curve, the whole curve representing 1, of course. And there's some other value up here which represents another 2.5%. So when I get 98, you can see I'm dealing very much with the lower half of this. So let's see where 98 lies. Really the question I'm asking is 98 right of this line, sort of in this area here, in which case I do not have sufficient evidence to reject the null hypothesis, or is it on this side somewhere over here, in which case I do have sufficient evidence to reject the null hypothesis and suggest that ownership of houses in Germany is different from that in the UK at the 5% significance level. So let's see how I do that. I go then to my calculator and I open up the stats bit, and I'm looking for a binomial distribution with some variables. And I'm saying, where does the 98 occur then? So that's going to be my x value is going to be 98. My n, how many samples did I take? It was 180. And what was the presumed percentage? It was 64%, or 0.64. And when I put that in, I get a value that's very small indeed. It's 5.23 times 10 to the minus 3. P equals 5.23 times 10 to the negative 3. I don't like working in this directly. I'm going to write that out carefully because it's very important to be absolutely right. So when we're doing this, I have that, and I'm now going to compare that to, not on screen, I'm sorry, 0.00523. And so I'm going to compare that to my 2.5% up here, which is 0.025. And clearly this is a great deal smaller than that, which means that my 98 value that I was concerned with exists somewhere over here. So it very much is in there. So to answer the question, to do what it says rather, when it says to conduct a hypothesis test, I can't say for certain whether this person, Annika, is right or wrong. I can't say for certain, but what I can do is say that there is sufficient evidence to reject, if I could spell the word reject, the null hypothesis at the 5% significance level. And so that's where we get to. So that's how I conduct a hypothesis test on this. There's sufficient evidence to reject the null hypothesis. We assume that the ownership of houses in Germany is different.